You want to make your fantasy sports league more than a fantasy? Then you need Trophy Smack. It's the #1 store for fantasy and tournament trophies, belts, draft boards, loser awards, and other ridiculous products. Trophy Smack is more than just a trophy company with outstanding customer service and products. It's the very essence and heart of every fantasy league. And if you click now, TrophySmack.com gives you free shipping, a free loser poster, and can have the hardware to you in a few days. Bragging rights included. Go to TrophySmack.com right now and take your fantasy league to the next level.
Welcome to the Red Shirts Dynasty Podcast, a Ball Blast football production. Here are your hosts, Matthew Betz, Matt Okada, and John Helmkamp.
Welcome back into the Red Shirts Dynasty Podcast. Of course, we are part of Ball Blast Football. If you're watching on YouTube, you're probably logging in and being like, what the heck? I thought there was only 3 hosts on this show. We are joined by a very special guest today. But before we get to him, let's check in with the usual host on the show, Okada, John Helmkamp. Boys, how are we doing? I feel like I haven't talked to you in 24 hours because literally that's how long it's been.
It's actually been even less than that because last night we started later than we were supposed to because some sham was asleep.
Whose fault was that one, Okada?
It's hard to say.
What a bum.
Man. Yeah, if you missed it, I put it out on my Twitter today. A clip that just had me dying laughing. Like, Okada just so tired, like asleep. Like I'm pretty sure his eyes were just like wide awake. Meanwhile, his brain was just not functioning. He was not there.
Was no one.
But check it out. Like I said, we have definitely not. We have a great guest on the show tonight. You might have heard of him. Maybe. I mean, maybe if you like listening to people talk about wide receivers or watch tape about wide receivers and read about them. We have the best in the business. One of my favorites, Matt Harmon, a great follow on Twitter at Matt Harmon, _BYB. The king of Brussels sprouts. Is that still a thing?
I mean, I definitely don't tweet about them as much as I used to.
You used to though, a ton.
I know, yeah. Well, I had to officially retire because like the art of bit making is really not. It's not only just having a good bit; it's knowing when to kill the bit because you see people riding the same old shtick for like 10, 15 years in this game, man. You can't do that. You got to know when to get off the train. And about 4 or 5 months was all I could take of getting about 10 to 15 Brussels sprouts pictures in my mentions a day. So I did have to retire that one, but still as big of a fan of the actual vegetable.
Love it. Of course, if you're not familiar, we're going to just spend a minute kind of talking about Harmon, about your kind of like intro into fantasy, how you got into it, a little bit about your background. Of course, I always feel bad like asking you to come on the show, and I think it's your second time on here. I feel bad because I feel like you just get pigeonholed into like only talking wide receivers. But of course, we're going to talk wide receivers tonight. I do have one question at the end of the show.
The title literally has wide receivers with Matt Harmon per the show doc. So
it did.
Sure.
It did. Maybe we could throw people off and put the title as like running back talk with Matt Harmon. People will be like, wait, what?
Wait, I'm not listening to that. That guy didn't know what he's talking about.
We will get into that tonight, though. I just have a quick question about that. Do you get tired of talking about reception perception and wide receiver analysis?
I mean, I think if I got tired of it, that would be pretty bad. Because that's the brand. That's not a bit. That's the brand. There's a difference. Like you got to ride the brand until the brand kills you, but you got to know when to get off the train with the bit. So there's a difference there. But no, I don't get tired of it. And I think especially the fun answer is I legitimately enjoy talking about the position, and that's why I started studying. It was because it interested me, and it still does interest me to this day. Like I essentially wanted to answer the questions that I had about wide receivers that I felt like no one else was really answering to the way that I would be satisfied. So in that sense, I'm still as fired up as ever to talk about it. And I mean, I think the like non-fun answer, like the dork answer is, the process of reception perception, I've become more and more bullish on it as really the best way to evaluate wide receivers. And I think that's one reason that I continue to enjoy talking about it. Also, just the data is better than ever. The more players that get added to it. I mean, talk to me in late May, when I'm kind of rounding out the work for reception perception, like the bulk of it. Maybe then I might be a little more sick of it, during some of those late nights, everything like that. But no, I mean, I love it, and I'm still as hyped as ever to talk about the position.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for our listeners that aren't aware, reception perception and the data and Matt's write-ups can all be found with the Fantasy Footballers and the Ultimate Draft Kit for that. But Harmon, you're not just there. So tell the people more about what's going on over at Yahoo Fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty exciting season, all things considered, for Yahoo. And I mean, I'm sure you guys feel the same way. It's like the weirdest season prep ever. I think we haven't even really realized how weird it is, because like we're about to go, if there's really going to be a game, and it sounds like there is, on September 10th, like we're about to go from 0 to 60 so fast, because usually there's the ramp up period, but we're getting none of that right now. And I mean, I think that's a big reason. There's no secret. I feel like everybody in the industry feels it. I just read a piece in the Washington Post interviewing a few people in the business talking about like interest in fantasy is generally down right now. And I think because the sickos who aren't, the four of us and everybody, and probably everybody listening and watching this show.
Welcome in. This is a safe place.
Yeah, this is a safe place for the sickos. But like, most people out there aren't thinking about football 24/7, 365 days a year. And they're not getting those sort of like little reminders that this is really way off your question. But I mean, I think it's just something to talk about right now. Like, they're not getting those like little reminders, the little trickling of information, like like these camp hype videos are just starting to circulate around social media. There's no preseason games. As much as preseason games are not fun to watch, like at least the first 5 minutes, you're seeing players that like, Chris Collinsworth and Al Michaels talking about players that you're excited about going into the year. There's none of that. Like, it's just literally going to go pretty much for the average fan from nothing to live games so quickly. And I think all of us have to hope that the interest in fantasy will also pick up at that moment too. But for us at Yahoo, we're trying just as much as possible this year to evolve our content while shooting everything from home. And it's going to be like I said, it's going to be a weird season, but it's going to be a fun and challenging season at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think like you said, everyone feels that for sure. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a really fair topic. I mean, we're total, fantasy degenerates over here, but the average consumer is that person that's in their work league that, does a redraft the Saturday before the NFL season starts every year. And they're not getting that kind of ramp up like you were talking about. And that's something that I think that we've been trying to keep in mind with our content and our written content over on the website as well, about, not everyone looking for information are these dynasty diehards that are trying to absorb something 24/7 about fantasy football. It's like, hey, the average consumer might not even know who Jonathan Taylor is. Like, they don't know these rookies that are coming into the league or who's changed teams, and they're so trying to get them caught back up to speed is going to be interesting. And I'm kind of curious when that's going to peak. I feel like it's got to be coming in the next week or so, that everyone's kind of like, wait, football's in 7 days. Yeah. We should probably
start a fantasy league or something.
Yeah. Let's
look,
do that.
We literally just had this happen, John. Like Peter King, let me just be clear. I really like Peter King. I really like Matthew Berry, and I really like Brad Evans. Three men I'm about to mention right now.
Yes.
I'm not talking junk about anybody here, but they, Matthew Berry and Brad Evans, and I think they were both right to a certain degree, just went back and forth about Peter King mentioning in one of his articles, like, hey, you probably want to draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire in your fantasy league. And, of course, Brad's point was, well, great sizzling take, and it's like, sure, like this guy's probably going to go in the first 2 rounds of every single draft that happens in the next couple of weeks. But I would guarantee that most people, like September 13th or whatever the Chiefs first, because they're not the Thursday night game right now.
No, they are. It's
They are. Yeah.
Oh, see,
there you go.
On Thursday, in a couple of weeks from now, that's probably going to be the first time most people see Clyde Edwards-Helaire in a football uniform doing football things ever, like that, because most people have not been sitting here like following football, because look, there's a lot of other stuff to think about right now in this country, in the global universe. Like this, there's a lot else going on right now than thinking about, is this rookie running back really somebody that I can trust? Because I've never heard of him. Also, he's got a hyphen in his name. Like, what the hell is that? So yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people out there like that, and I think it's important to just remember it's really hard, especially like working in a place like Yahoo, to try to talk to everybody, because there are people that like we've all been talking about Deontay Johnson all offseason. I'd bet you that the majority of people who sign up to play fantasy football on Yahoo are not sitting there reading my reception perception takes like all offseason. So, I mean, it's going to be, I think the gap between those two groups is probably going to be wider than ever this season. And it just adds to the weird nature of football here in 2020.
Absolutely. I think weird is the perfect word for what's happening in our lives right now. But hopefully listeners will make it a little bit easier for you tonight. Let you know about the wide receivers that we all, and Harmon included, feel like might be ready for a breakout this year. So we're talking breakout wide receivers. I picked a list of names here that we can go over. Harmon, if there's anyone that comes to mind that you're like, we got to talk about this guy because I truly feel he is on the cusp of a breakout, feel free to bring him up. But I want to start with the 2018 class. And this guy has been the talk. I mean, if you're on Twitter, you know about Calvin Ridley's hype. But if you're not on Twitter, then maybe you're kind of just hearing this, that Calvin Ridley has been someone that people have deemed a breakout candidate. They've talked about the Chris Godwin comparisons from last year, who took a massive leap forward into fantasy stardom. Man, reception perception. I know you'll talk about it, Harmon, but you mentioned something in there about people being able to reach that 1,000-yard threshold based off of how they perform in reception perception. So I know Ridley is on that list. Talk to me more about why he is potentially in for a massive season.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the history of reception perception, number one, Ridley is just a really good player in this methodology. I think reception perception is perfect to kind of quantify what a player like Calvin Ridley is good at, peeling back all the other surrounding factors and showing what a good separator, what a good route runner he is. And I think it also just shows, like, my thought when Calvin Ridley got drafted was, wow, what a perfect situation for him to do what he does well. He's not going to have to be that alpha number one receiver for maybe ever in his career, but certainly not to start off in the first 3 to 4 seasons when Julio Jones is still there at his peak. And that, I think, those favorable matchups, not having to line up at the number one X receiver spot, drawing all the double coverage and all the extra defensive attention, that was going to be really good for Ridley, and it really has so far. When you look at him in his first 2 seasons, he's been above the 90th percentile in both of those seasons. And so far through the history of reception perception, the only 2 players who have scored above the 90th percentile in reception perception and have failed to record a 1,000-yard season at any point in their career is Calvin Ridley and my guy, Curtis Samuel. So we're right now looking at those 2 guys as extreme outliers in the methodology in terms of predicting success. If you peel it all the way back to the 80th percentile, then you're looking at Ridley, Samuel, Shepard, and Anthony Miller, and Willie Snead, number 5. Can't forget about Willie Snead. Those 5, yeah, right. It's very random, but those 5 guys are the only 5 players that have played multiple seasons in the league and have failed to record that 1,000-yard season. We got a lot of guys coming in from that 2018 class that have reached that threshold, and I think, honestly, the only guy who has 0% chance to record a 1,000-yard season next year of that crew is my guy, Willie Snead. Every other person, whether it's, the most likely to least likely there, they have a shot at getting it. And Ridley, of course, I think already would have gotten it had he not, gotten injured last season. So, yeah, everything is really lined up there for him to have that massive season. I think the Chris Godwin comparison is one that I've made. The one you just made, everybody's made so far, is perfect because you're looking at a guy that's, playing alongside a proven, consistent number one receiver, just like Godwin was last year, but really not concerned about the volume despite that, because we know this offense is going to throw the football a lot, just like Tampa Bay threw the football a lot last year. And most importantly, we knew going into last year, Chris Godwin was verifiably good at football. We already know, I think, that Calvin Ridley is verifiably good at football.
So my big question here is, and we talked about it on the NFC South division breakdown, which was our last pod, actually. We all know Ridley is good, very good at football. The question is, what is his peak for fantasy? Do you see him settling in as like a wide receiver 5, like Chris Godwin might be for several years, or more of a guy who might be a fringe 12 to 15 range receiver at his best?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to be tough to know that question, like the answer to that question, for several years, because as long as Julio's there and Julio's at his peak, I don't really think he has the potential to be a year in, year out, top 5 type of guy, because I don't think he's going to ever see that type of volume. And I think, he's not really a great yards after catch guy. He's not really a great contested catch player. He wasn't at any point during his career in Alabama, and I don't really think he's been great to this point in the NFL either. So, and those are things that Chris Godwin, like in addition to Chris Godwin being a really good detailed route runner, a really good separator, he also added those elements to his game. So he had the profile of a guy that could be that 1A, 1B type with Mike Evans. Ridley, despite the fact that he's that great separator at all levels and great against press, great down the field, great in the short range, we don't really know if he's all of those things yet. So right now, I would say that I think he settles into, in a really great offense, being a number 10 to number 15 type of receiver on a annual basis. At this point, it's just going to be hard to know the answer if he can handle that kind of volume until Julio falls apart. And right now, there's really I don't think there's any indication that he is starting to decline yet.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about when breaking down that team is I'm never going to be early on getting out from Julio Jones. This is a guy that I'm going to trust forever until he proves to me that he can't do it. So I'm with you on that. He's under contract right now if he plays out his entire contract with Atlanta until Ridley's age 29 season. That's absurd to me. So I agree. I don't know that he's got that top 5 ceiling that a lot of people are kind of throwing out there around Twitter, especially. One of my big concerns for him is his touchdown upside in that offense with bringing in Todd Gurley, who we know is a good pass catcher, especially in the red zone, and what his utilization might be in terms of that. So I'm wondering if his touchdown upside is kind of capped as well, which could be one of those factors that could have pushed him into a higher tier.
Yeah, that's a good question. The only thing with Gurley is I think he's just such an unknown, and I mean, he might be there 1 year and then that's it. So if you're thinking about it from a dynasty perspective, it's hard to really think Gurley's a huge factor. And Gurley he's a proven pass catcher, but he was pretty bad as a pass catcher last year too. Yeah. And they also really have no idea. Dirk Cutter today says he could see anywhere from 15 to 25 touches. Yeah. And I said that you've got just a lot of wiggle room there between 15 and 25. Yeah. You got enough square footage there to build a whole nother wing of your house with that much wiggle room in that touch projection. So yeah, man, I think it's interesting. This whole offense, I think the two most proven guys are Julio and Ridley. So going into this year, I think those guys are mostly going to have their targets funneled that way. And Ridley too, maybe he becomes that Stephon Diggs type player. Then I think if Stephon Diggs was ever in a situation where he could get 150 targets, and I think he'd be a top 5 fantasy producer. I think he has all of the skill sets there that you need to see. Ridley, I don't think he's proven to that point yet, but it took Diggs a couple of years, I think, to get to. I consider Diggs an alpha number 1 wide receiver. He just really he's shared the field with another great player there too, which again is what we're pretty much talking about with Ridley.
It's actually hilarious. You bring up that comp. Okada said the exact same thing. He's like, I just feel like Ridley is going to be Diggs. Julio's there. He's not going anywhere.
22 hours
He's so good at running it. Just the parallel is perfect.
Yeah. Very similar player.
Here's the thing. The main takeaway from this podcast is that anyone with the name Matt is going to be very smart at fantasy football.
This is true. And John is out.
Been real, John.
Good to meet you. All right. I'm out.
All right, boys, let's move on to a player that honestly, entering the offseason, I was like, I'm not sure what's going to happen here. We have Amari. We have now CeeDee Lamb on the Cowboys. What is Michael Gallup's role? And then I sat here and I talked to Okada and John throughout the offseason, and I was like, man, Michael Gallup is just too good to not go away. And now you look at, I feel like everyone, especially on Twitter, is catching up to Michael Gallup hype. I'm interested, Harmon. What do you think about Gallup here? And specifically, we have a listener question kind of asking, what are your thoughts on the receiving options for the Cowboys in general with Witten gone, Cobley's behind 166 targets? Is there a scenario where all three of these receivers, can be relevant for fantasy? And that's from one of our writers, Cam Harper, NFL on Twitter.
Yeah, pretty insane that here in the year 2020, we can say the absence of Randall Cobb and Jason Witten leaves behind 160 plus targets. Wait, yeah, what? What?
Is this 2012? What year?
Yeah. I know, but hey, look, not the first weird thing the Jason Garrett coaching staff has ever done. But, I think I think there is enough volume there for sure for all three of these guys to be relevant in fantasy. I think CeeDee Lamb is going to be too good to be denied a pretty significant role in his first year. And I think this offense is just going to throw a lot. There were Dak led the NFL in passing yards last year, was a QB2 in fantasy last year. Like, I think there's enough for these three guys to eat, especially because Elliott's kind of had an up and down role as a pass catcher. He's never a guy that's going to get, Christian McCaffrey type volume. Blake Jarwin's a guy that I think all of us are, looking at as a potential tight end breakout, but certainly not proven. Despite the fact, my brother-in-law, my future brother-in-law, if, fingers crossed, they end up getting married in November. And I only say fingers crossed because of coronavirus, not like any other problem. Just to be clear. He's like a big Cowboys fan, and he cannot let go of the fact that Dak apparently called Blake Jarwin like the most athletic guy on the team. So like every Cowboys fan that's not, was one of us sickos, they can't let go of that. Like they'll always hold Blake Jarwin to that comment. But anyways, I don't know what the hell that had to do with my point here. But this is a great receiver trio. And I think that these guys are actually all pretty close, like in terms of ability, in terms of talent. The volume that went their way last year in terms of Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper would tell you that too. In the games that he played, Michael Gallup actually had a higher percentage of the team targets and a higher percentage of the team air yards than Amari Cooper did. And I think Gallup is really an underrated player. 1,100 yards in his second season. Pretty solid separator, especially in the vertical game and reception perception. Has always been a very good contested catch guy from his days at Colorado State all the way to his second season in the NFL. And I think the thing that is most impressive about Gallup, and this is sort of where we can get a little hot takey about these two guys here, Cooper and Gallup. Like Gallup plays the harder position in this offense. He's replaced replaced Dez Bryant as that alpha X receiver guy. He's going against press coverage on a snap by snap basis. They do a lot of really smart things, like with Amari Cooper, that those bozos in Oakland, like the Jack Del Rio coaching staff, never did. They rolled Amari out as that X receiver, and he's just never really. He was a great route runner, very refined player coming into the NFL, but I don't think he's developed a lot of moves off the line of scrimmage to become a very good player against press, and that's why he struggles when he goes up against top-level cornerbacks, and we saw that happen a lot last year. So Gallup's not necessarily drawing number one corners. I'm not saying that, or like teams are just really selling out to stop Michael Gallup, but in terms of just when you're looking at slot, flanker, X, the hardest one to play is the X receiver position, and that is Michael Gallup's spot in this offense. So I think all three of these guys are really, I think they're really, really good. I think they're going to be awesome this year, but the one whose price in fantasy has been the most attractive to me so far has been Gallup.
Absolutely. That was going to be my question is if you have to pick one, is it Amari, who's going, I think, in like the third round, Gallup in like the seventh? I mean, to me, I've just been smashing the draft button on Gallup every time in the seventh, sometimes eighth round in best ball drafts. Like, it's crazy. But Amari, I don't know, I can't do it. And I feel like it's because I listen to Okada all the time and he just talks about the inconsistency and how he hates it. And so then I have like Okada's like voice in my ear, like, don't do it. Don't draft him. But at price, which one would you guys prefer?
Well, I think the reality. Sorry, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's Gallup easily for the price, and for me, it's pretty much Gallup straight up. Anyways, I think the most important thing that Matt said, and it was kind of almost in passing.
I'm sorry. Which Matt?
Oh, Harmon. The most important thing Harmon said, which was pretty much in passing, and I think it should be reaffirmed because it, to anyone not sitting at this quote unquote round table. Really more of a square screen, but whatever.
It's a square.
It might be surprising is that these three guys are very similar in ability and talent. Like, everybody thinks of Amari Cooper as one of the best in the league, and everybody who knows who CeeDee Lamb is, anyone who's a college fan and a fantasy player, knows he's arguably the best receiver in this year's draft class. And Michael Gallup is in that tier. He is that good. So I don't think that's something that should be overlooked.
Yeah, and I mean, I think just the gap between him and Cooper is not really justified. And, we can talk about the inconsistent – like, everybody asks me about this. Why is Amari Cooper inconsistent in fantasy? Why is he an inconsistent producer? Because I think he's an inconsistent player. Like, I think that the reality is it's borne out on the field, and then it comes into the stat sheet. And, it's not that he's out there, getting open and Dak is missing him. He's – like, we see the peaks of his route running ability, the check down account, the NFL account, they'll throw out, these great clips of him dusting people on the field. And those happen. Those are obviously part of the reality here. But at the same time, there's plenty of times where he gets locked down. There are plenty of times when he's inconsistent with that technique. And I think that's all part of the equation here. And that's why he is an inconsistent producer. And I don't really think that the offense needs to fully rely on Amari Cooper when Michael Gallup is this good, when CeeDee Lamb is this good, and when they have some interesting ancillary players there as well.
I like it. Let's move on to our next player, and then we'll move on to the 2019 class because I know John's very excited to talk about one DK Metcalf. But before we get to him, definitely not wearing a Seahawks hat, definitely not having a Seahawks banner in the background, of course not. But I want to talk about one of the two players we have left on the dock here in the 2018 class because I do want to make sure we get to the mailbag questions. But we have Christian Kirk currently going as the wide receiver 44 versus Anthony Miller going as the wide receiver 55 in current ADP for redraft leagues. I know reception perception's been really good for Anthony Miller. Is that correct, Harmon?
Yes, for sure.
Let's talk about him. What are your thoughts on his situation? Obviously, he's missed time with the shoulder injury. He's been playing alongside another reception perception favorite in Allen Robinson. Do you see a breakout for Anthony Miller with the Bears this year?
Yeah, I definitely think it's in the cards for sure. I mean, the only thing that really needs to happen is he needs to stay healthy for a full 16 games, which has been a problem through his first couple seasons in the NFL. But we've also seen him when he's been a full snap player be incredibly productive last year in the back half of 2019. His reception perception is really good. Like I mentioned earlier, he's one of these players that profiles as a breakout guy based on the history of reception perception. He's really good across the route tree, and they use him in the slot. John, you'll appreciate this as a Seahawks guy. I've always comped him very favorably in reception perception to Doug Baldwin. Like I think he can.
Dougie.
I think he can be a slot receiver that isn't just a bunny hop guy. You know, he's not just getting those short layup targets. He can win downfield. You can see it on the route success rate charts. Last year, 83rd percentile success rate versus man coverage, 91st percentile against press. And that Bears offense, like, you know, obviously there's a lot of questions at the quarterback position. There's a lot of questions at the pass catcher position too, because it's Allen Robinson, who I think is locked in for another 150 plus targets. And then it's Anthony Miller, it's Ted Ginn, you know, the ghost of Jimmy Graham. Like, what are we doing
see
here?
That article? That article today, 2 days ago, talking about how Jimmy Graham has been the best player in Bears camp.
Oh gosh.
That's not what you want to hear, actually.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I was like, yeah, if he's their best player right now, you got some issues to work at. But yeah, man, Miller, I know Okada's been a huge fan of him for a while. I'm sure this makes your heart very happy, Okada.
It does. I mean, almost all these guys do. It's good to hear. I mean, I just pulled up my Anthony Miller redraft 2020 ranking. I have him 20 spots higher than this ADP at wide receiver 35. That is absolutely crazy value. And that's just based off my projections, which means it doesn't even take into account the opportunity where Trubisky, or if it ends up being Foles, ends up being a big step forward over what they have been in recent years for the quarterback position in Chicago. And Miller takes like an extra breakout step that almost makes him a 1B to Robinson, and he gets even higher than wide receiver 35. So I love the player. I love the opportunity. Smash for sure.
Yeah, Doug Baldwin comp is certainly really fascinating, obviously, to me as a Seahawks fan. But for people forget that Doug Baldwin was like a forgotten fringe wide receiver one for like
all the time.
3 or 4 straight
Every
years.
year.
Yeah. He was like right there, and you'd get him in the 4th round and just be like, okay.
Yep.
So if that's a comp for Anthony Miller, that's really high praise for what he could possibly bring to the field.
Yeah, for sure. Before we move on to John's boy, DK Metcalf, I want to remind everyone about the sponsor of tonight's show. That is fantasygo.com. Be sure to check them out because it's draft season. We got DFS coming up. Obviously, you're going to need help with your lineup. So check them out because what you can do is you go on there, you find your favorite analyst who signed up on Fantasy Go. You can hire them for a week. Literally, they have to. You're paying them a small amount of money to help you with your lineup. So I know Harmon's DMs get filled up all the time, I'm sure, on Twitter. John's always trying to talk to people on Twitter, but like people just run out of time. The analysts that are on fantasygo.com are literally being hired to help you. So they will definitely answer your questions, definitely be able to give you some advice. And the best thing about it is just the chat feature. That's what I've heard back from people that use it, being able to ask those questions and, you know, why would you start player A over player B and really understand the process. It's fun. So check it out, fantasygo.com. And they are currently running a promo for the start of the season. You get a week for free. So check that out. Awesome stuff over at fantasygo.com. All right, John, are you ready?
I don't know.
We're talking about
pretty excited.
the Seahawks Wide receiver 1, Tyler Lockett. No, I'm just kidding. I know Lockett is another guy who just crushes interception perception. I think he's going to finish higher than DK this year. But we're talking about breakouts. We're talking about DK Metcalf, who, oh my gosh, I just have this vision of him at the end of the Eagles game last year in the playoffs, ripping my heart out and then just throwing it on the ground as an Eagles fan. But Harmon, talk to me about DK
JJ
Metcalf.
Arcega-Whiteside was on the other side of the field.
Oh no!
Well, he was awesome for about 4 catches last year. What are you seeing with reception perception on DK Metcalf?
Just to make John wait a little longer here before we talk about Metcalf, let's just say these 2 draft classes, 2018 and 2019, I think have really changed the wide receiver landscape. And because both of these 2 classes, I think, have really outkicked expectations. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I felt like consensus going into both of these wide receiver classes was, 2018 kind of weak, 2019 not a great wide receiver class either. A lot of guys that could maybe fill complementary roles, but maybe never any true number 1 guys. Man, coming out, especially 2019, 2018 has definitely had some really good players come out of there too, but especially coming out of 2019, I'm like, these are the future stars of the league. When you're looking, and you can just run down the list, and we can do that here for sure. And Metcalf is one of these guys that I think does have an ability to be a number 1 receiver. Now, I think the Seahawks already have a number 1 receiver, because I think Tyler Lockett last year put together, he was like my 2016 breakout candidate, and it took a few years for it to kind of come to fruition. But I think we really saw Lockett last year take his game to another level to be that number 1 receiver. He's finished above the 79th percentile in reception perception success rate versus man coverage in 4 out of his 5 years. But last year, he really rockets up to be the 5th highest player in that metric in 2019, 3rd in success rate versus press coverage. Both of those scores are above the 95th percentile. We've seen him now take that leap to be a top level guy. I don't really think there's any reason to think that Metcalf is suddenly going to, be the number 1 target here. But I think Metcalf is good enough to absolutely be a 1B, similar to what we were talking about with Chris Godwin earlier. I love drafting both of these guys, and I actually think you can make a pretty sexy combination of Russ, Lockett, and Metcalf on one team, and you're going to have a lot of weekly upside there for the times that Seattle falls behind and they actually let Russ cook in the 4th quarter. So we can all hope for that here.
Single week.
What is
it? Oh crap! Hey Russ, can you help us out?
I think it's Kevin Clark from The Ringer says the Seahawks have never played a normal game ever, and it's funny how that really does just hold up on a week. Hey, 2020 is going to be a weird football season, but the Seahawks have been playing weird football seasons since Pete Carroll pretty much got there. But back to Metcalf, I think just like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were pretty much 50% of the Bucs passing game, just those 2 guys. I think that's what Lockett and Metcalf are going to be this year, because there's just not a lot else going on in that wide receiver room. Greg Olsen, we'll see at tight end. They don't really use any of their running backs at this point as primary receivers. So, we're not talking about the same raw volume that the Bucs guys got last year, but I think we're talking about sort of a similar market share approach. And the player that I've always comped DK Metcalf to is Dez Bryant. And I think that he can be that type of player. And in fact, when you look at it last year, Metcalf was really awesome as a rookie. He was great, but the Seahawks really did simplify his assignments. 53% of his routes in reception perception were either a slant or a 9 route. Over 63% of his snaps he took at just 1 outside left wide receiver spot. That was the highest of any player last year. But who cares? Because again, he crushed in those assignments. And again, when you look at Dez Bryant, one Dez Bryant season that I have in reception perception was his 2014 season, back in his peak. He was a great player, but 57% of his routes that year were a slant, a 9, or a post. And so again, I think those 2 players profile very similarly. And if you've got Lockett cooking and Metcalf going, I think this is going to be a really fun wide receiver core. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of 2020, we think of them as a top 5 duo in the league.
I like it.
My body is ready. I'm excited. That's fantastic.
John's
I love that.
Better as the conversation went on. I saw him getting sweating a little bit. He's like, yes, this is it.
Wipe the brow.
Do you guys think they both finish inside the top 20 this year in fantasy? Both Lockett and DK Metcalf.
Ooh.
We got a yes from John. No surprises there.
Yeah, right. He was ready with that yes, no matter what he said. You could have said inside the top 5, top 2.
I just double checked. I have Lockett at 19, Metcalf at 21. So barely I have to say no, but it's right there.
All right, Harmon.
Yeah, I'm really bullish on Lockett this year. I have him as wide receiver 12 because I think that he's going to have, like, he gets all the targets you want. You know, he led the NFL. Like, people talk about, hey, DK is going to be the better touchdown scorer. Lockett led the NFL in red zone targets last year. Like, so he gets the scoring area usage. He gets the deep game usage. He's never going to get the type of raw volume that you want, but he's so efficient because of the way he's used and because he plays with one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the NFL. I love Lockett this year. He's like an auto pick every time he's in the 4th round. And I've got DK right there at like wide receiver 22. So I'm also going to say no, but again, what if there is a scenario where they do kind of finally let Russ take the reins fully here? Then I think it would be almost a lock, like that these guys both finish in the top 20, but I just don't think you can reasonably project that.
No, and what we've talked about in the past with talking about this team, and like, yes, I am a Seahawks fan, but I try to be objective when talking about fantasy. The system and the play calling that they run is completely counterintuitive to fantasy football success. Like, if they had any other head coach or offensive coordinator in the NFC West, then these two guys would be looked at as being, both of them potentially fringe wide, like Lockett for sure, a wide receiver 1. DK Metcalf might be considered a top 15 guy, like we're hearing about AJ Brown, if it was in a system that fed him the ball more. So I try to be objective, but I am very excited about the future outlook of DK Metcalf.
Rightfully so. Man, yeah, like just imagine a world where Russell Wilson was actually.
It's best just not to imagine it.
No, I'm not. Yeah, no, I'm not too much about it.
It's like the same. You just imagine that they've changed this time. They want to get back together. Like they've changed. No, they haven't.
No,
they haven't changed.
I had to quickly pull it up just to see 20 plus attempts in the first half for Wilson. Only 3 times in the last 2 seasons.
Oh, fun.
God. You hate to see it.
You do really do. You do hate to see it.
All right, moving on. We have about 20 minutes left in this podcast, and if it's okay with you guys, I would like to spend every single one of them talking about my guy, Terry McLaurin. We are all so high on this guy. I honestly feel like every day goes by, if I'm just like bored, I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of in a bad mood, so I'm going to move Terry McLaurin one spot up in my ranks to make me feel better. I'm so excited about McLaurin this year. Harmon, is the hype out of control, or does reception perception support that this dude is an absolute monster?
Well, how bad have your days been? Where's the highest you've managed to move him?
Oh, man. I mean, hey, we got like 16 days left till football. So at this point, he'll be wide receiver 1 by the time the season kicks off. No, he's currently in a wide receiver 15 for me in my ranks.
Nice. Well, I guess I've been living a harder life than you, man. I got him at wide receiver 13.
Let's
go. I love this guy. I mean, he has everything you want. I actually have a ton of reception perception goodness to read off for Terry McLaurin. So let me unfold the scroll here. So last year, look, we know he's actually just a really good contested catch player. 30.9% of his sample targets last year were a contested catch attempt. You playing with those quarterbacks, that's going to happen sometimes. 82% conversion rate. I mean, complete stud at the catch point. But it's really the route. It's the route running that makes him, I think, a future star. 76% success rate versus man coverage. That's the 89th percentile. 79.7% against press. That's at the 93rd percentile. Excellent across the entire route tree, short, intermediate, whatever. Absolutely crushed it. That success rate versus man coverage score that I mentioned, that is the 4th best success rate for any rookie since 2014. The only 3 players that have beat him so far are Odell, Tyler Lockett, and Calvin Ridley. That success rate versus press, 3rd best for any rookie season charted since 2014. The only 2 players to beat him, the aforementioned Odell Beckham and Michael Thomas, both pretty good wide receivers. And lastly, that success rate versus man coverage is the 34th best of all players sampled seasons since 2014. That's over 250 players in the sample. I mean, he's just outright awesome as a rookie. I think he does have, of all these guys I'm excited about in 2019, the one I'm most excited about is Terry McLaurin, because I think he profiles as like the true superstar of the group. And we can peel back more layers of the offense, the quarterback, whatever, but I think everything is there for McLaurin to just smash this year.
People keep talking about Calvin Ridley as being the next Chris Godwin, but I feel like if there's one that's going to do it, it's going to be Mclaurin. Like, I feel like he's got the opportunity plus the skill set to really take over and be that one that's going to emerge into a potential top 5 guy.
See, I think he's just like the next Odell. Like, I think he's that good. I mean, like, I think he's I think he's like he's an alpha in the making. I think he already proved it in year 1, and like yeah, the opportunity is great for him. Scott Turner last year was an extremely pass heavy coach in neutral game scripts, over 64% passing play percentage, just in situations where they weren't trailing. Like, he wants to be a pass first coach. And I don't really think they've got a lot of options there to throw to except Terry McLaurin. And look, Dwayne Haskins, like, all we're asking is Dwayne Haskins just to be passable. And I think he can be passable. You know, last year, in the last 3 games of the season, over 8 yards an attempt, 67% completion rate, 5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. Like, I think it's all pretty much there for Terry McLaurin. I think about it like how Allen Robinson ended up becoming a top 5 receiver in 2015. And like, all we need is really Haskins to be Blake Bortles good. And I think he can be. I think he can be Blake Bortles good.
Oh, I forgot about Blake. What a guy.
The question I have is, how do we turn our Terry McLaurin love on this podcast into a sponsorship with the Washington football team, where they just name their team the Washington Red Shirts? Because that seems like the way to get that.
Hey,
they've already got the red shirt. It's a win-win.
I mean, so I bet you guys have more positive like sentiment, more positive PR than they do right now.
That's true.
I would like to think so.
So we're going through and we're editing this. Just take out the last 3 minutes so that his hype doesn't go absolutely nuts. And then we can release it at the end of the year and talk about how Matt Harmon was on it before everybody else. Okay, so let's just snip that 3 minutes out so I can keep drafting him where he's going.
Yeah, it's absurd. Wide receiver 25 in ADP. Like, if you're getting McLaurin as your wide receiver 3, in that case, you don't even really need him to be good. You just need him to be like average to produce in fantasy, but has wide receiver 1 upside. I mean, it's just I don't understand how people aren't drafting him at that price. But again, we've talked about it. We're sickos. We've been talking about this for a while. There are people that are like, oh yeah, who's that guy on Washington's team? Oh yeah, that Terry McLaurin guy. He seems fine. Like, people aren't catching up yet. And in drafts I've done, I'm just like, yes, please, thank you. I will take him every time. So,
and it's especially a Haskins thing too. Like, I mean, I think people saw McLaurin like make plays last year, and like any goofball at home can be like, oh, this guy's good. Like, just watching games on Sunday, because he's just a pop off the screen type of player is Terry McLaurin. I mean, they're probably not going to sit there and be like, oh, it's the next Odell Beckham or whatever. But I mean, I think we could do that by doing something like reception perception. But I think a lot of people are like, Washington's a train wreck. And this guy, Dwayne Haskins, was like a complete joke when he got thrown out there, when he really wasn't ready. And I mean, because I think Dwayne Haskins was just kind of unfairly maligned in his first couple of starts, because he just wasn't, I mean, he wasn't ready. And that's okay. Like, we don't need everybody to come in right away and be an excellent player. And, you know, there was the clip of him like trying to get his, you know, linemen engaged or whatever. I think it just was a lot of unfortunate situations. And just, you know, to be straight up honest, like, he's a black quarterback and they're always unfairly judged to that degree. So I think there's just a lot working against Haskins. And I think that is going to drive the national sort of perspective more than anything Terry McLaurin can do too.
For sure. Let's move on to, again, we'll finish up one more wide receiver from this 2019 class, and it's loaded. It was tough to pick like 4 names, but we're looking at 2 guys, Marquis Hollywood Brown, currently wide receiver 32 in ADP, or Deontay Johnson, wide receiver 42 in ADP. Harmon, I'm gonna kick it back to you, man. Of those 2, who do you think is more likely for a prime for a breakout this year, according to the data that you have?
Man, I wish I could say, can I say both? Because again, really like both of these players, but I think the more likely player is Hollywood Brown, just because, I mean, he's going to be one of the top 2 targeted guys on his team. I also think there's so much more. I mean, I just trust the ecosystem in Baltimore right now more than I trust the ecosystem in Pittsburgh, because, you know, I actually just wrote a piece about this with Ben Roethlisberger, and, you know, all of us, and I say all of us, and mostly what I mean is me, got excited about Curtis Samuel last year under the assumption that, like, oh, we're getting a lot of positive press of Cam Newton. Like, we're going to get a good full 16 games of Cam Newton. We got 2 not so good games of Cam Newton, and then Kyle Allen and Will Grier the rest of the way. Like, it was a train wreck. So I think we have to keep that negativity sort of in our projections for the Steelers and not getting too out of control, because like we could see Ben Roethlisberger for a little bit, and hey, guess what? They did nothing to update that backup quarterback situation. Like we're still dealing with Mason Rudolph as the number 2 there, which is insane after what we saw last year. So that reality exists, but it's hard not to like look at the Steelers and get extremely excited about this skill position group, because Juju's still there as a consistent big slot receiver. Johnson, I think, 88th percentile success rate versus man coverage, really, really good separator at all levels of the field. I am ahead of the ADP on my ranking with Johnson, because he's the one that I'm really confident is the type of player that they need, to dictate coverages, to really be a full field offense. And James Washington's a good player too. And then they've got, guys like Chase Claypool. They've even got Eric Ebron in there in the tight end room. James Conner maybe bouncing back this year. Hard not to get excited about the Steelers offense. But if I got to pick between the two, I'm picking Marquis, because another player that I'm just like sky high on, and also just he's attached to the MVP in Lamar Jackson. So I think he's in a better situation.
Yeah, real quick, I'm interested just to see, like, obviously last year coming off the Liz Frank surgery, I think it was pretty unrealistic for anyone to expect a rookie coming off of a Liz Frank surgery to reach, obviously, his peak in the NFL. I mean, that just wouldn't happen. But he was so successful, even injured. Did the reception perception data look good for him, or did he produce kind of as an outlier, so to speak, coming off of the injury and then also being a rookie?
No, I think that's what's really exciting about him, is that he was actually really good in reception perception. And I think people would be surprised to see that one of the routes that he ran the least often was the 9 route. That was his only route that was below the NFL average, just in terms of route percentage, like how often he ran that route in his reception perception sample. But I think that also shows you he's a full field player, because he still finished at the 83rd percentile in success rate versus man coverage, 73.6%. Like, he's not just a vertical game player. He was really good last year based on his technique and his dedication to being a really good route runner. This is something I've sat down and talked with him about prior to him getting selected by the Ravens in the NFL draft. Like, just that dedication and preparation, and not just being a speed guy, not just being a gadget guy or anything like that. He's a full field route runner. And I think that's why it's so easy to get excited about him, coming now into this year, theoretically, 100% healthy. And he's just, he's been crushing it in camp. And like, that's not surprising to anybody that's familiar with his game. He's a number 1 receiver in my mind. He's not just like a, Deshaun Jackson type of player. Not that there's anything wrong with Deshaun Jackson.
For sure. And yeah, having that screw removed from the foot too, after Liz Frank surgery, just, looking at the injury is going to help immensely with pain. We saw him in and out of the lineup a bunch last year. So I'm definitely warming up to him quite a bit here, especially in redraft leagues for 2020. All right, last kind of segment before we get into the mailbag. Harmon, you do such a great job. You always talk about these wide receivers, but I want to know one player that is not a wide receiver that you think is a sleeper who is ready to break out this year. Could be a quarterback, could be a tight end, could be a running back, because fantasy, more than just the wide receivers. So hit us with another position here.
Let's hope. I know the position more than just those guys. The running back position, I don't know if you guys feel like it this year. There's guys that I find myself gravitating to early, the obvious guys, even tight end sort of the same way. But one player that I really do like, I've changed my opinion on this year. I've never been a big Ronald Jones guy, but I'm like, really, I'm very attracted to Ronald Jones this year, because like, look, the negatives are far outweighed by the positives at this point. Like, Jones was a pretty competent player last year. I think we can give him that. And now he's going to be playing an offense that I think we all expect it to be good. Keyshawn Vaughn has kind of fallen behind in camp this year. And like LaShawn McCoy's dust. It's just, that's not a situation where I'm threatened by LaShawn McCoy. So he's a guy that I think I've been moving up my ranks. I've been like wanting people that are using my cheat sheet or whatever. I want them to draft Ronald Jones based on where I have him. And I think he makes sense in a construction where if you miss out on some early running backs, you can double back and get Ronald Jones. And like, again, I'm not going to sit here and say Ronald Jones is like the next big thing at the running back position, but I just think like he's in a very cost attractive place in terms of ADP right now.
Yeah, historically, we are not huge Ronald Jones fans on this show, but
I think I've been the biggest advocate
that's true.
for Rojo.
Yeah, out of Okada, you and I, you definitely have been. But I mean, at that ADP, like he's probably the last running back off the board who is most likely to be the starter week 1 and have an opportunity. Now, we've talked about the concerns in pass protection with Tom Brady there. If he misses one assignment, we just talked about it on our last show, like, could he be pulled right away and then someone else is inserted in the lineup? Maybe. But yeah, I think he is a value this year. And certainly the general consensus is just like, man, maybe he's just not a good player. And now we have an opportunity to kind of buy low, so to speak, on him here. And then last thing, Harmon, one wide receiver that we didn't talk about that you think is either maybe like a post-hype sleeper, Curtis Samuel, or someone else who is ready for a breakout that isn't on the list here of this 2018 and 2019 class.
I think Sterling Shepard's a guy that I'm still really excited about. I mentioned him earlier as one of these guys that's, above the 80th percentile that has failed to record a 1,000-yard season. And I think it's just he's a little bit of a victim of circumstance, right? Because early in his career, he's playing alongside an alpha wide receiver in Odell Beckham, alongside a quarterback who is, to put it kind, on the back nine of his career. Then last year is really his kind of chance to become that number one guy, and the usage in terms of these wide receivers would really point you, like, in terms of percentage of team targets and whatever. Like, Shepard was doing extremely well, and he was doing well in games with Daniel Jones too, also with Eli Manning there in that one Eagles game. But nevertheless, like, Shepard, I think, was playing well. He was getting good volume, but there was just a lot of health issues last year. I find myself not really, like, I'm intrigued by the Giants offense, but I don't have a lot of conviction in their pass catching group except Shepard. I think he's a guy who really is going under discussed right now because people are, they got an eye on Darius Slayton, Golden Tate's still there. Evan Ingram is theoretically healthy for the time being. There's a lot to look at in that Giants offense, but I find myself still very gravitated to the idea of Shepard establishing himself as a top level guy there this year.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I kind of think Sterling Shepard might be one of the most underperforming players, especially at the wide receiver position, of the last few years, and not necessarily of at a fault of his own. Like you mentioned, the circumstances have been a mess. He's missed several games in 2 of the last 3 years.
Yeah.
The quarterback situation has been wacky. They had Odell, then they shipped him off. And it hasn't all come together for him. But from a talent perspective, I think he has a talent that we've been talking about with some of these 2018 and 2019 guys, and just needs the right pieces to fall into place to break out.
Yeah, me too.
Absolutely. All right, guys.
Go trade for Shepard.
You got to do it before the show drops, John. So tonight. Let's get over into the mailbag. We got a couple questions here from Twitter, and then we'll let Harmon get out of here. We have one coming in here from Dan Oliver on Twitter. He says, you have the 5th pick in a 10-team half PPR league. Are you taking Michael Thomas if he's there, or would you start with Kamara or Cooks in that case? And I assume that means Cook, Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, no, you got to take Brandon Cooks.
Brandon Cooks, man. This is the year.
I'm rising to Brandon Cooks.
5th overall. So,
I want to know what the goofballs ahead of you have done that Alvin Kamara's there at pick 5.
Right.
You take Kamara. I take him at number 2 or number 3, man. I mean, so if he's there, he's the guy. I think that is the range, though. I think the only running backs you absolutely don't take CEH over is Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, Zeke, and Derrick Henry. And then I'm starting to think about him over guys like Aaron Jones or Dalvin Cook. So if you really feel bullish on that player, you can take him there. But I think Michael Thomas is the more secure bet of all of those tier 2 running backs. But the tier 1 guys, and I have Kamara in that tier, I'm taking him there.
Fully agree.
Co-signed.
Me too. Moving on. At P2W Fantasy. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. At P2W Fantasy on Twitter wants to know. He says, we've seen a world where Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Brandon Cooks were all startable fantasy wide receivers on the same team with the Rams. Is that going to be the case for Cooper, Gallup, and Lamb? We talked about it a little bit. Assuming they all stay healthy. 3 wide receivers, the same team. Are they all startable with confidence, whether it's your flex or wide receiver? Wide receiver 3 probably. But I think he's asking, like, would you roster and start 2 of these guys in the same lineup on the same team this season?
I think whether you're going to start them is going to be a week-to-week sort of proposition, because I don't think you're going to be able to lock in any of these guys for, truly elite level volume where you're just setting and forgetting it. But I think that they can have, there have been plenty of times in the past several years. I think back to like the Peyton Manning level Broncos, or like when Aaron Rodgers was really crushing it with the Green Bay Packers. They had this just like embarrassment of riches at wide receiver. that it was just pretty much like, who won your fantasy league that year? Whoever drafted the most Packers players. Hey, who won your fantasy league that year? Hey, whoever drafted the most Broncos. Like, I think that is within the range of outcomes here for the Dallas Cowboys this year. I think, but being conservative, I think they're probably all like wide receiver 3 flex guys where you're sort of weighing them, based on the matchups or, the Vegas projected point totals. Are they going against another team that's going to put up a lot of points? So but I do think that like it's comfortable to draft 2 of these guys. I probably wouldn't draft Cooper and Gallup on the same team, but I do think it's, reasonable to maybe take Gallup and Lamb or Cooper and Lamb because you just leave yourself open to upside that if one of these guys gets hurt or whatever, or, misses a couple games because of damn virus, like, I think you're looking at a situation where you could walk into more upside than you think there.
Perfect.
Yeah, I don't entirely hate it. I'd rather have Dak, Zeke, and Gallup, and that I'd feel great about than to take 2 or 3 of these guys. But I mean, Cooper and Gallup to me are going to combine for like 150 yards and a touchdown almost every single week. So if you have both, it might not be terrible. I'm not going to do it on purpose, but if it happens, it happens.
Yeah, the Cowboys stack this year just feels so good. Like when you leave a best ball draft with those names that you just mentioned, Okada, like you're just like, I got it. Got this in the bag, which of course means you probably won't, but it feels good when you leave the draft with those players. Kevin Galusha, good friend of the show, a Patreon supporter, wants to know, he also put a graphic up here from Perception. Do you think you'll ever chart anyone as bad as Marquis ever again? And if you look at it, man, it is all sorts of red, which...
Well, I saw that Harmon liked that tweet earlier. Harmon saw that tweet a couple hours before the show.
Yeah, I saw that one. I saw that one. I mean, the thing is, like, he's not the worst in terms of just like overall success rate. I think he's the only guy that I have in the history of reception perception that, somehow fell below the average on that screen route, which is pretty tough to do. That's like, you probably had at least like you had like 2 screens blown up during the course of a season if you fell below the average there. But the only guy, the actual like worst player, if you just look at overall success rate versus man coverage, is Justin Hunter. 2014 Justin Hunter season is the worst one we have. 31.9% success rate versus man coverage. The second lowest was Devonte Parker's rookie year, 42.9%. So like that's a huge gap, like from the second worst to the worst.
Yeah.
Parker's gone up in years since, like not a sizable degree, but he's no longer sitting there because I think he was like injured that rookie year too, and it just got off to. We know it took forever for Devonte Parker to get going, but that's a big gap, over 10 percentage points from second worst to worst. I would say that Justin Hunter holds the record in terms of just the absolute worst player that I've charted. But that Marquis Lee chart is it's tough to look at, guys. It's pretty tough to look at.
Out of curiosity, we talked about a lot of guys who chart really well, and therefore we expect breakouts. And I don't necessarily put you on the spot, but do you have any guys off the top of your head that people are kind of high on for fantasy that you've charted much worse than what people expect, and so maybe you're down on?
This year, not as much. And I would also say that, like, one thing that I have learned the longer I've done reception perception is that it's definitely a better tool to use to get excited about players than to like look at the overall success rates and be like, this guy's bad. Because I think very rarely do you look at guys that perform like I've said several times, like guys who perform really well in this series, they eventually end up being productive, because I think the takeaway there is, look, if you can run routes, you can separate, you can get open, you're going to get the football eventually. But there is sometimes context to guys who, if you just look at the lowest success rate versus man coverage scores from this last year, you're looking at players like Juju, Cooper Kupp, but those guys are also extremely good at separating against zone coverage. Now, guys who are just straight up red across the board, then we're talking about our Marquis Lees. We're talking about our early career Devonte Parker. Devin Funchess is another example. Justin Hunter, the end of the line for like Dwayne Bowe. There's another guy in there from 2014 that was terrible against man coverage. So this year, last year was a guy that I didn't like was Geronimo Allison. Like he started to get some pump because, he was going to be a Packers level receiver that was, number 2 guy for Aaron Rodgers, but he was pretty terrible across the board in reception perception. Kelvin Benjamin, another one who's terrible across the board in reception perception. So there have been guys in the past. This year, I don't necessarily have anyone who I'm still clicking around here a little bit, but I don't necessarily think there's anyone that people are like getting way too excited about that like I'm all the way out on. The only one who has me a little worried is Preston Williams, is a guy who wasn't like that good in reception perception last year, but did walk into a lot of opportunity. But I'm also like hesitant to write off rookies right away when they don't perform well in the series. Cause I actually was tweeting about this today. Like Kenny Gallaudet and Cortland Sutton are 2 guys who have really taken, a leap every year from their first year to their second year. And then obviously for Gallaudet into his 3rd year. So I'm always hesitant to straight up say like, no, this guy is what he is. Usually once they establish themselves as good players in this series, rarely do they start to kick back down levels. But we have certainly seen some guys stay bad forever. Others we've seen like a little bit of development there.
Well, and Davonte Adams is one that increased massively against man coverage over his career, hasn't he?
Yeah, no, he's like the outlier of all outliers.
Yeah,
like
sure.
We've seen, like I was tweeting about with Gallaudet today, or Cortland Sutton's a better example that he went from like the 33rd percentile to, somewhere around the 55th. And same with Gallaudet was like from the 40th to now he's at about the 82nd. But, Davonte Adams was literally the 2nd percentile. And then in 2018, he was at the 99th, like literally from the bottom to the top, like one of the stone worst receivers in the league to absolutely one of the best. So we don't see that. We do not see that very often.
Sure.
So with Marquis Lee, you're saying there's a chance.
Oh boy. Oh man.
Probably not saying that.
All right, last question. This one comes in from a very good friend of the show, at Matt Okada.
True.
He would like to know, Harmon, who is your number 1 rookie wide receiver for this class in Dynasty?
I think I don't really have like a convicted take on this one. And luckily no one pays me to do dynasty rankings, so I don't have to have a take on this one. But I think it would probably be CeeDee Lamb. I think just, good offense, good situation, good quarterback, really good player. And look, like things we can sit here and say like, yeah, he's going to be the number 3 receiver on this team. Things can change quickly for this player, especially they have an out in 2022 in Amari Cooper's contract. Yep. And that could be a time where now we're looking at just Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, or we're looking at, Cooper's gone and they give Gallup a decent deal and now it's him and Lamb. And so again, I think we can get sort of in our own heads about immediate opportunity because there have definitely been times where guys have been buried behind players and all. Like when Michael Thomas got to New Orleans, it's like, Brandon Cooks is already there though. Cooks was gone like not long after, and Michael Thomas is like one of the best receivers in the league. DeAndre Hopkins, another one, like Andre Johnson's there. Like, DeAndre Hopkins now, well, number 1, he's not even in Houston anymore, but still. Yeah. So, I mean, things just change so quickly that I'm going to go there with like, I don't think Lamb's going to be the best receiver in redraft this year, but I do think the best receiver in this class attached to a very good offense and a very good quarterback.
For sure. I think we can all buy into that. Boys, what a show. I feel like I learned so much. And anytime we have someone else coming on talking positively about Terry McLaurin, they're always welcome back on the show. So
and DK Metcalf.
And DK Metcalf. So everyone's happy. We really appreciate your time, man. Thanks so much for coming on. In case our listeners haven't figured out where to follow you on Twitter, where to find your podcast, where to find Reception Perception, just plug your stuff. Let them know where they can find you.
Yeah, I mean, best place to find me on Twitter at @MattHarmon_BYB. If you dug any of this reception perception stuff, you want to find out a little bit more, head to Twitter, use the hashtag reception perception. And then when you realize how awesome it is and you want to purchase access to it in the Ultimate Draft Kit, go to receptionperception.com. There's a link to follow there. And you'll be flying, man. And I hope everybody out there enjoys the season. And we can all, if anyone listening, wasn't excited before, hopefully a little bit more excited about the season now.
It's go time. We have about 2 weeks until kickoff. So yes, it's prime draft season. So excited. We're back probably next week. Talking probably, I don't even know. I've got an injury podcast coming up with Stefania Bell. So that's going to be a blast. Recording that next Tuesday. So make sure you subscribe. We're back next week. Everyone enjoy the weekend. Enjoy draft season. Football is here. Until next time, we are the Red.